So thanks for your time, everybody. I know everyone's really busy, so showing up here tonight is a great thing and a great first step in learning about teen dating violence. So thank you for your time. As JL just mentioned, my name is Lisa Hoopis, and I'm the Director of Education and Training at Sojourner House. So Sojourner House's mission is to end domestic violence, sexual assault, and we actually have a new add-on to the mission, which includes human trafficking as well. So we're going to start by talking about teen dating violence and really kind of give context to the umbrella term for of interpersonal violence. So you'll hear the term interpersonal violence, and dating violence falls under that umbrella, in addition to some other things that would also fall under that umbrella. So general violence, even if it didn't fall under, even if we're not talking about dating violence, could also fall under interpersonal violence, harassment, assault, human trafficking, child abuse, violence. All of those things are going to fall under it. So we're going to really focus today on teen dating violence, and it is a little bit different than adult dating violence. And so I'm a trainer at the police academy. I was actually there all day training new recruits on how they respond to domestic violence. And so I'll talk a little bit about the domestic violence laws, but also it is a little bit different with teens because obviously they're not adults. And so when we're talking about things with teens, we're not necessarily always talking about it in a legal sense. So I'll try to differentiate when we're talking about, legal things versus just again under that interpersonal violence umbrella. So oftentimes when people think of dating violence or they think of domestic violence, they think of the picture to the right? They typically think of people yelling at each other, screaming. They might think of physical violence. And what we're here to talk about today is how it's more than just that. So when we're talking about dating violence or domestic violence, or even some of the other things, like I mentioned, human trafficking and sexual assault, what we're talking about is a pattern of behaviors that power and control are at the center of. So folks are using power and control to exert control over a partner. And so whether we're talking about it in stalking, or we're talking about it in teen dating violence, the idea of manipulating and trying to gain power over somebody else is really underlying a lot of the different things that we're gonna talk about tonight. So although we're gonna talk about some actual tactics that they use and things that you might see as we're talking about these different things. So for example, isolation, right? When people are in teen dating violence relationships, they tend to be isolating from their friends and their family and the people that love them and want to support them. So that's a tactic that they use, but underlining that tactic is this idea of gaining power and control, right? So isolation is the tactic being used, but the reason why it's being used is because if I can gain that power and control over somebody, I can control what they're able to do. It allows the person that's doing that controlling to feel more in control of the relationship. So oftentimes we'll see people making somebody feel bad about themselves, making somebody feel afraid of the relationship. And we'll talk in a little bit about the cycle of violence. But oftentimes this happens over time. So when I'm training at the academy, I like to tell folks, these things aren't happening on the first date. So when I go into schools and I'm doing workshops and I'm talking to teenagers, I say, anybody who thinks about getting hit or punched or kicked in a relationship would know that that's clearly an unhealthy relationship. But oftentimes those things aren't happening in the beginning of relationships. And in the beginning of the relationships, people are trying to gain this control, but they're also trying to gain the person's trust. Because when they have their trust, that's a part of their control. And so we're going to, again, talk about kind of the progression of this, but these things don't start off as being violent. They typically start off with some other tactics that are used to gain that power and control. And in the beginning, those tactics might just be putting somebody down, or might be telling them not to go out with their friends. And then as those tactics start to not work, they start to shift and get more significant and more severe. So what are we talking about when we talk about some of these abusive behaviors? So, I just mentioned the physical ones are often the ones that people think about. The ones that are often charged criminally are often physical abuse. So if somebody is physical and attacks somebody else, that is something that is criminally chargeable, whether you're a teen or whether you're an adult. It would be you would fall under the domestic umbrella if there was a physical assault. So as long as that met a crime, then that could be charged. With the next one, psychological and emotional abuse, this still falls under domestic violence and teen dating violence, but this is not something that you can charge somebody with. You can't charge somebody with yelling or screaming or being emotionally abusive to somebody, but that doesn't mean that that's not domestic violence. And what I see a lot with young people is that they don't really think that the relationship that they're in, even though it's unhealthy, categorizes as violence because it hasn't gotten to that step yet, right? That stage hasn't happened yet. It doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. And it also doesn't mean that the emotional and psychological abuse that they're experiencing isn't as significant as that physical abuse. So again, it's not chargeable. You can't, charge somebody with yelling or saying something mean about somebody, but it does fall under the dating and domestic violence umbrella. Sexual abuse and sexual assault, again, these are chargeable. Stalking and harassment are chargeable. It makes it a little bit more difficult to charge these. So with stalking and harassment, and we do a whole training on stalking and harassment. With this, it's really the totality of those events. So it's documenting those events over time. And so we do a lot of safety planning with folks who are experiencing stalking and harassment. And again, it's the totality of those events. So if it just happened once, it wouldn't fall under stalking and harassment to be charged criminally. But if somebody can prove that the person is intimidating them with the purpose of causing intimidation, then those are things that can be charged. Again, it doesn't matter what somebody's age is. And then when it comes to digital abuse, again, this one, it really depends on what we're talking about. So I have a couple of slides later on where we'll talk a little bit about digital abuse, but we often see this take place in many forms when it comes to teen dating violence. So sometimes it might be somebody going into somebody's phone or computer to find information about themselves. Sometimes it might be creating fake websites or create fake profiles in the other person's name. It might involve sending pictures of somebody unconsensually. So we'll talk in a little bit more about digital abuse, but this is something that's very common amongst teen dating violence situations, and it's something we're seeing more and more of. And again, really depends on what we're talking about. Depends on if it's something that we could, that if somebody wanted to press charges, they could. And then financial abuse is the other one. Not necessarily that we see it as much with teens, but we do see it, especially when one person in the relationship might have a job or one person might have some funds. So they might be paying for things where the other person isn't. And so that puts added pressure on the person that doesn't have the funds or doesn't have the money. And so, this is something that even with teens is something that we see happen. Sometimes people are in relationships just so that people will buy them stuff or do stuff for them. And so again, we're going to go into a little bit more of all of these. But when we're talking about teen dating violence, these are some of the different things that we're talking about. Now, it doesn't have to be all of these. It could be some of these. What we often see is that clients, when we're talking to them, have at least 2 or 3 of these things happening at the same time. So again, the physical one's a little bit more obvious. So this would be hitting, scratching, pushing, threatening, any kind of touching of somebody else that involves the purpose of hurting somebody else. So, I was at the academy today, that they were shoving and pushing was the only thing that they walked in on seeing. And again, with domestic, that's all that the person needs to be able to call it a domestic. So, any of these things that you see on the screen would fall under the physical abuse umbrella. It doesn't have to actually be physical for it to fall into this. You'll see some other things like keeping a dating partner from leaving a situation would also fall under like physical abuse, damaging somebody's property. Now there's separate charges or separate things if somebody is preventing somebody from calling for help. So if they're trying to get 911, somebody throws the phone and smashes it, that is, or it's called relinquishing a phone. So that's something that's separate and chargeable. But any kind of damaging of somebody's property, again, these are all things that could potentially be criminal. And like I said, we do tend to see the physical abuse stuff being reported more. So one of the issues with teen dating violence, and I'm going to share some statistics in a minute, is we really don't know the scope of teen dating violence, because oftentimes with the physical abuse, with the emotional abuse, with some of the other ones that I mentioned, they're not getting reported in the same way that the physical abuse gets reported. So we tend to see these getting reported more because there's injury or because there's something that that has happened that has made it so that other people might become aware of the situation, where with some of the other ones, a lot of times it's done behind closed doors, other people aren't aware of it. And again, people aren't necessarily identifying it as teen dating violence or domestic violence. Strangling is on here. This is probably one of the more severe ones that we see. So if you are hearing of somebody being strangled, meaning, and it doesn't have to be that they're putting their hands around their throat. It could be with a pillow. It could be with any way of obstructing the person's ability to breathe. Different than choking. We choke on food. But if you're putting your hands around somebody's neck, it's for one purpose, and that's to hurt them or to kill them. Taking away somebody's breath is the ultimate power and control. So remember, I said earlier, these things are just tactics. The idea of using a weapon, the idea of strangling somebody, the idea of I'm going to push my hand down until you can stop breathing, and then I'm going to slowly release it, now tells you that I have power and control over whether you live or die. I have power and control over whether you breathe or not, right? So again, all of these things, power and control, are really at the core of why these tactics exist. So some things to look for, and these are some things that we tend to find earlier on in the relationship. So these tend to come before the physical abuse. So early tactics of power and control, that constant put down and criticizing, right? So in a nice, healthy relationship, people are making people feel good. They're healthy. They're enjoying being around the other person. People aren't making you feel bad about the relationship. In a healthy relationship, people are taking responsibility for their actions. In an unhealthy relationship, people are minimizing the abuse. They're putting blame on the other person. A lot of times we call this, oh my God, why can't I think of the name of the word that I'm trying to, gaslighting, right? We call this gaslighting. The idea of making somebody believe that what they're experiencing isn't actually real, isn't actually happening. I just mentioned isolation, but we see this a lot. People might purposely start fights in front of their friends or family. They might act obnoxious so that they don't get invited to things. And sometimes even when I know we have parents on here, sometimes even when parents are doing that isolation, saying that they can't see the person, that causes isolation, which again feeds into that power and control of the abuser, which is exactly in some cases what they want to happen. They want for your kids to be fighting with you, because then they're going to run to that person for that emotional support. So again, that isolation is really important. Making sure people have friends, people have support systems. Those things are really important. We certainly see excessive jealousy, people accusing the other person of cheating when they might actually be the one cheating. They're really monitoring the person's every move. So we see things like Ring doorbells being used to tell when somebody, leaves the house and comes in the house. There's all kinds of trackers. There's those tiles now that can be placed without somebody's, knowledge, or they could know about it, but be forced to have it on their keychain or forced to carry it around with them. So, again, we see a lot of these different kinds of tactics being used, where the person just really doesn't care about the other person. They don't, care about their feelings. They don't care about their success. They may put them down. They may tell lies about them. They might threaten them or criticize them. So these are all things that we characterize as unhealthy relationships. Again, opposite of somebody who's trying to make somebody feel good and build them up and support them, which would be in a healthy relationship. So again, without going too much into this, because this is another whole topic, sexual assault and abuse does fall under this category. So any touching of somebody without consent. So we do a lot of work in the schools to really try to educate young people about what consent is and how to have those conversations with their partner, so that their partner is asking what they want, but also that they're communicating what they want and they're communicating what their boundaries are. And so part of that is having conversations around consent and what people want to do and what people don't want to do. And when we go into schools, we try to normalize these conversations, and get people to think that there are people that like to be hugged and there are people that don't like to be hugged. There are people that like to be touched and there are people that don't. So you don't want to make assumptions going into a relationship about what somebody wants to do or not wants to do. And so really having those conversations about consent is really important. anytime somebody doesn't give permission or want somebody to do something, it would fall under the sexual assault umbrella. And so without getting into too much detail, really the difference would be, the age of the parties. So depending on the person's age would depend on how it would get charged, if somebody was looking to charge somebody. And with sexual abuse and assault, you have the option. Not everybody chooses to go the law enforcement route. But if they do, the charge would be based off the age. And then it would be based off of what the actual incident was. So if it involves penetration, it's a first degree. And if it involves touching of the genitals or the body parts, it would be a second degree. If somebody is having, relationships with somebody and they're intoxicated or they're incapacitated, they're not able to give consent. And the old idea of, this person has to say no, or this person has to stop, or they have to kick, or they have to fight off, isn't the way that we teach anymore, right? So it's really this idea of getting consent before you engage in sexual activities. And, certainly we'll see situations where somebody says no and the person repeatedly tries to get them to change their answer into a yes. I work at the college a lot. I see that happen a lot at the college, and that's coercion. So that's not consent. And again, if somebody is not consenting and they've said no, and now you're, coercing them, or you're forcing them, or you're threatening them, it would fall under the sexual abuse, assaults umbrella. So again, we want people to do things that they're comfortable with. So checking in with folks is going to be really important in a healthy relationship. But in an unhealthy relationship, again, this idea of doing things without consent, taking in and sharing pictures. We sometimes will see this with video. And again, it's the taking and sharing of these intimate moments that can be really hard, especially if they are shared. For victims, that can be really traumatizing. It can be really difficult to get some of these things offline. I will say that our agency does have a lot of resources. So if somebody does find that they're in a situation where somebody's pictures were shared and that person is under 18, we do have a lot of resources right now. It wasn't that way a year ago, but currently there's a few different ways that we can get those pictures taken down fairly quickly. Not to say that, they're going to be gone forever, because it's the World Wide Web and it's really hard to make that promise. But I will say that there's a couple of organizations out there right now that are doing a really good job of trying to make that happen. All right. So then the next one that we're going to talk about is financial abuse. And again, with this one, it's it could be having one person always expecting the other person to pay for things, not letting the person go to work. Sometimes we'll see people showing up to that place of employment, trying to start problems or issues so that that person gets fired. And again, this idea of control, right? So controlling somebody's money, controlling the ability to earn money or to spend money, would all fall under financial abuse. And so this is one that we see really common amongst teenagers, and this can take the place of a couple different ways. So stalking and harassment can happen in person, or it can happen online. So again, it could happen where the person's just showing up in these places, and there's no other reason for that person to be there. Sometimes they let the victim know that they're there by intimidating them and putting something that will let the victim know that they were there. So they might put a little figurine, or maybe they write their nickname someplace so that they, again, that power and control, right? Just to let the victim know and freak them out and have them know that, somebody's looking at them, somebody's watching them, somebody knows what they're doing. Other things we see, so they'll send unwanted text messages, letters, even after the person has told them to stop. I was talking to somebody this week where they set up a fake Venmo to try to text them because they had blocked them from all the other social media. So again, this person is just going around every which way to just try to get that person and try to communicate with that person, even after that person has said that they don't want anything to do with them. And then leaving unwanted flowers or gifts. And sometimes the power and control in this can also be, I want to let other people know that I'm a nice person. So if I show up at your work and I get you flowers and I buy you gifts, then other people are going to think I'm such a nice person. So when you go to tell them the bad, awful things that I do, in their mind, they're going to remember that I brought you flowers and I brought you gifts. And again, it's kind of just messing with their minds a little bit.
Lisa, could you speak a little bit slower for the interpreters?
Sure. Sure. And then using those social media networking sites as well. So showing up on social media, spoofing, so creating fake accounts so that people don't know that it's the person that's actually stalking. we'll see people set up whole fake accounts to spread rumors. And then the other piece around stalking is that there are lots of places where people might go, and now that other person is aware that that person is going to be there. So what I will a lot of times tell young people, especially if they're worried about stalking and harassment, is not to share your location where you are, and to ask your friends to do the same thing. Because a lot of times what stalkers will do is you have blocked them, or you've said, I don't want anything to do with you. So now they go to other people, so other friends, other family members, to try to get a picture, to try to get a glimpse of what you're doing, and to try to get some information. So I always like to let folks know, tell your friends, tell your family what's going on. Ask them not to share pictures of you until you leave the place, so that they can't show up there, while you're there. So those kinds of things are really helpful tips when we're talking about safety planning for somebody who's being stalked and harassed. The other thing is, if somebody is finding that somebody is showing up there, there may be some kind of tracking device. And so if somebody's worried that there's a tracking device, certainly if we're talking about a teen, they might not have a car, but checking their backpacks, checking their belongings, checking their bedroom, or if they have a wallet, or checking things to make sure that they haven't put, and these detection things are so tiny and small that people don't even realize that you can lift up your pocketbook and put them like underneath the seam or the hem, and people don't even know that they're there. So again, just checking those kinds of things. So we're seeing digital abuse also taking the place of stalking. So people are stalking more on digital means, but also the way that they use digital abuse can be unhealthy in a relationship. So somebody might tell somebody who they could be friends with, who they could talk to, what they're able to share. They may, tell somebody they have to, put a certain status, or not be friends with somebody, or not do something on there. Oftentimes they are very obsessive about who they're friends with on social media. So they can't be friends with exes, or they might not be able to be friends with somebody of the opposite sex. And then they're going to check and follow up to make sure. And a lot of times people don't have control over who requests them. They can control who they accept as friends, but they can't always control who they request. And abusers can get angry and mad at people, even just for the people that are requesting to be their friend. The other thing that we'll see a lot is using phones. So for example, the person might say, I want you to call me as soon as you get home. I want you to call me as soon as you get in your car. I want you to call me as soon as wherever you are, right? So again, it's that constant checking up on the person, constantly knowing what they're doing. And again, just being really hyper focused on every move that the person is making. You also might find that the person is just texting all the time with big, long, threatening messages. So the person might say, like, I can't talk right now, I'm in class. And then they get, long messages about why they should be talking to them, and how, they shouldn't avoid them. And so, again, these are things that, when people are showing us their phones, it's never just like 2 or 3 words. It's always like big, long things that they're sharing. Again, just to threaten to somebody, just to make them call them, follow up with them. And then they can also be putting down people and just, be really mean to people through social media and through other messaging kinds of apps. So I just mentioned a whole lot of things that, again, by themselves, people are going to look at and say, well, if this thing is happening to me, why wouldn't I just leave, right? Why wouldn't I just get out of this relationship? And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But one of the things that we know is that teen dating abuse and teen dating violence often is the greatest predictor of domestic violence. So oftentimes teens or other people that are in these relationships have seen other people in these relationships, either on media or in the family or friendships, where they've started to normalize that these things are okay. And the more that teens normalize that the things that are happening that are okay, the more likely they are going to be to get into, get out of one unhealthy relationship and just jump right into another unhealthy relationship. So it's really important for us when we're going into schools, or when you're talking to your kids or to the people in your life that are important to you, because you all showed up here tonight, that you really think about talking to them about the healthy, the healthy characteristics of a relationship, and giving them good examples and showing them, what it's like to be respected and to be listened to and to be heard. And so the more that we can give them examples of what healthy relationships should look like, the more when they're in these unhealthy relationships, they can start to identify the gaslighting. They can start to identify the threats, or the coercion, or the things, the tactics that are being used against them. I've literally shown, I'm going to show you a couple of wheels in a few minutes, a couple of examples that you can use when you're talking to other people. And I've shown them to teens, and I can literally hear the clicks in their head going off. Like I now have words for what I've experienced, right? And so again, it's a good thing to teach young people as they're coming out of these relationships and as they're in these relationships, so that they don't continue to stay in them, and so that when they leave them, they don't enter into other unhealthy relationships. So we have a law in Rhode Island, and it's called the Lindsay Ann Burke Act. And I've been saying how I do a lot of work in schools. Well, the Lindsay Ann Burke Act is what requires us to do this work in schools. So Lindsay Ann Burke, unfortunately, died from homicide. Her boyfriend killed her. She was a college student at Rhode Island College, but she was from North Kingstown. Her mom was a health teacher in North Kingstown. And, she was she was 20 when she was killed, and she didn't know the signs of teen dating violence, didn't talk to her parents about what was happening. And unfortunately, her boyfriend tragically took her life, and her mom really did a lot of legislative action to make sure that teens across the state are educated in Rhode Island around teen dating violence. And since this is Providence particularly, I'm happy to report that we are actively looking at the health education curriculum to make sure that relationship education and violence education is something that happens from the younger grades all the way up through the high school. So I know it is definitely being sprinkled into the middle school and high school now currently. And we are actively looking to make sure that it's happening at every single grade, every single year, because it might not matter to them the first year it gets taught to them. They might not be in a relationship when they're in the younger grades. So we really want to make sure that it's repeated, and that they're getting this information a lot. And the law does require for the schools to get that education. In addition, it also requires the teachers to be aware of these situations. So if the teachers see something or hear something in the schools, they are required to report that. And so again, it is a state law. We want to take these things seriously. And so the law requires there to be a policy on the books, and for the teachers to be educated on that policy, and also for the students to be educated on that policy. So I told you I'd bring you some statistics, and with statistics, especially around this topic, what we know is that they are very underreported. It's very difficult to find the numbers in teens because oftentimes it's handled either through the family or through the school, and that information isn't shared widely. And so when we're getting these statistics, a lot of times it is only through people who are reporting through questionnaires and data. And so as a researcher, I know that information is very skewed. And so whenever I'm sharing data, I always like to say these are just the reported cases and the ones that they know, but these numbers are much higher than what's actually reported. What's reported is 1 in every 3 adolescents in the US will be a victim of some kind of abuse. Those are really high numbers. According to the CDC, 1 in every 10 will be physically hit or hurt, right? And by an intimate partner violence at least once in a year. So again, those numbers are really staggering and high. And that's why we're here tonight, so that we can talk about it and we can get teens to understand what the different things, tactics that are being used and what some of the barriers to leaving are, so that we can overcome some of those. And then when we talk about sexual assault, 1 in every 10 teens are saying that they've been kissed or touched or physically forced to have sexual intercourse when they didn't want to. Again, these are really high numbers, and these are specific to teens. So these are not encompassing everybody. These are just talking about teenagers. So when we look a little bit older, if we're talking about 16 to 24, they have the highest rate of intimate partner violence. And the rate of 16 to 24-year-olds is almost triple the natural average, right? So we're saying that 16 to 24-year-olds are at the most risk for these kinds of relationships, this kind of violence. And then it's not just happening to females, right? I also like to remind folks that these things are also happening to males, and we know that they're even more underreported when it comes to males. So males can experience physical abuse and sexual abuse the same way that females can, and oftentimes they're just not sharing it as often with other people. When we look at gender nonconforming and LGBT folks, those numbers are even higher as well, because they're often threatened with being outed. Their gender orientation, their gender sexuality are all things that can be used against them to be threatened or for coercion. And then, when we look at older, so now when we get to the adults, we're looking at 22% of women and about 15% of men will have some kind of partner violence between the ages of 11 to 17. So this is when we're asking older folks about their relationships. The numbers are higher because adults are able to realize that some of the relationships they had when they were younger weren't healthy, but when they were in those relationships when they were younger, they didn't necessarily identify that as an unhealthy relationship. As an adult, they can look back and say that it was. So that's why we see that those numbers are a little bit higher. It's kind of retrospect numbers. And I already mentioned same-sex relationships. Again, those numbers are going to be even higher. And again, it doesn't matter what the gender, it doesn't matter what the age is. Anybody really can be a victim of teen dating violence. I'm talking to you about teen dating violence. A couple of days ago, I was doing something for elderly abuse. So it really does cover the spectrum in terms of age. So this is the question that I get probably asked the most, and it's probably the most frustrating question, because again, it's the idea around this question is that it's the victim's fault, right? Like the victim should leave, and why aren't the victims leaving? Why are they staying? Why are they, staying in a relationship that's abusive? And there's lots of reasons for that. The biggest reason is this cycle of abuse. Number 4 here in this situation, the calm phase, is what I also call the first phase in a relationship, the honeymoon phase. So, when you first meet somebody, everything is calm, right? The honeymoon phase, people are putting their best foot forward. They're sharing their favorite photos. They're sharing their favorite stories. They're not telling you about any, negative things or anything bad that's happened to them. And they're treating their partners really, really good. This is how they gain the trust. This is how they gain the control. They buy them things. They do things for them. Anything that they want, they become the center of somebody's universe, right? Which for victims can be really flattering. Like to become the center of somebody's universe can feel really good to people. And so they really dive in and get immersed into this relationship. And oftentimes we see people spend a whole lot of time with somebody early on in a relationship. There's really not a lot of fighting because people will do whatever the other person wants early in a relationship. So again, this is sort of the honeymoon phase. Now, at some point in the relationship, and it could be a week, it could be a month, it could be a year into the relationship, there's going to be some kind of breakdown of communication. Somebody's going to do something wrong. Somebody's not going to say something the right way. And there's going to be an argument, right? In healthy relationships, there are disagreements all the time, right? And people are able to communicate about what's bothering them and what's not bothering them. In an unhealthy relationship, there's this tension. Like, I can't say this thing that's bothering me because if I say it, the person's going to get mad, or the person's going to break up with me, or the person's going to do this thing. So I'm not gonna let that happen. I'm gonna do everything that they want me to do. So I'm gonna make sure the dishes are done on time. I'm gonna make sure I call them when I'm supposed to. I'm gonna make sure I do everything that they want me to do because I love the relationship I'm in, and I don't want to lose that, right? But the tension's there. I know that now I have to do a whole bunch of stuff. I know if I don't do something, something's gonna happen. So we call that the tension building stage. Now, the issue with the tension building stage is that victims have no control over the incident. They have no control over how the person's going to react. So even though they did the dishes on time, they might not have done the dishes the way the person wants them to. Or even though they called, they might not have called right away. Or they might not have done it exactly the way the person wants them to do it. So at some point, there's an incident. And early on in a relationship, the incident could just be verbal. Early on in the relationship, it could just be, I don't want you to go out tonight. I don't want you to do that thing. If you loved me, you'd stay there. So again, those threats, it could just be that. It also could be that there was an incident, that maybe somebody was pushed. So maybe somebody was hit. Maybe somebody threw a phone or, threw a computer and broke it, right? There's something that happens that the person realizes abuse, like that this is not good, right? This is not healthy. Now, sometimes it's other people. Other people say, hey, like, if it's police come in and arrest the person, say, hey, we're taking this person, whether you want us to or not, and we're removing them. Other times it's friends. Friends come in and say, hey, I'm really worried about the way that I see this happening, right? This, like, the fighting and the back and forth. It might be a parent. It might be an aunt or an uncle or somebody here on the call that's worried about a young person that says, hey, this incident just happened and I'm really worried about you, right? This is oftentimes when the victim seeks help from other people, like, hey, I don't know about my boyfriend, they did this, or I don't know about my partner, I'm worried about this thing. So it's the time when the abuser loses control, because the incident happens, either they got arrested, they got in trouble, their friends are all mad at them, the partner might have threatened to break up with them, maybe the partner did break up with them, maybe the person said, you just hit me, I'm done, we're breaking up, right? That incident happens and they have lost control. So the third step, that reconciliation phase, is really that power and control coming back. So it's really the abuser saying, I'm so sorry, I won't do it again. This was really your fault. It wasn't my fault. If you didn't do this, then I wouldn't have done this, right? So the idea of denying, gaslighting, flipping the blame, saying it's not as bad as the other person thinks, making the other person literally start to think that they're crazy and question their reality. But in this phase, they're also trying to gain that power and control back. So they're being super nice to the person. They're saying they're sorry. Maybe they're buying them flowers. Maybe they're buying them the thing that they wanted to do. Maybe they're giving them the money that they've been asking for months, right? As a way of gaining control and getting back to the calm phase. So the reconciliation phase is all about gaining control and getting calm again. Because if we're calm and we're in this calm phase, this is the phase that I have the most control over the person. Person's doing exactly what I want. And then the cycle, cycles around with something else, some other thing that the person didn't do. And what we tend to see is that the incidents tend to get worse in nature the more that the people cycle through it. And then the incidents start to become more frequent the more that somebody's in a relationship, to the point where the tension building phase and the reconciliation phase start to go away in a really unhealthy relationship. And you'll hear people say, well, I just walk on eggshells. It's either calm or it's crazy. So I'm just going to keep it calm because I don't want it to get crazy. But the reconciliation and the tension almost start to disappear. I had a client when I first started at Sojourner House who other people I've been working with for months, and they hadn't seen her for a while. She had burns on her face because somebody had thrown acid on her face in a fight. And she ended up coming back in, and I ended up talking to her. And one of the other advocates was like, that's the one that we've been talking about. We've been, wondering where she is. And I was like, she got married. Like, she's talking to me about her husband. And so she married the person that caused the harm and the abuse. And it was just to keep an eye on them and to make it so that, she knew exactly where he was, because he was stalking her and harassing her and threatening her. And she said, I will never be able to live my life without being in fear of this person. And so they took the power and control and married that person in hopes that they could keep that person calm and keep that person from having incidents. I don't recommend that. But it just goes to show how severe this cycle is when somebody's in it. That even something like a restraining order, a piece of paper, is literally just that. So if somebody is really truly in this cycle of abuse, finding out where they are in it and what their safety risk is an important thing. And obviously for that client, she had already had some significant physical assault, and was worried about death as being her next, thing that could potentially happen to her. So we have a few different power and control wheels. This one is specific to teens. The idea, again, the black being on the outside, the different types of violence, and then the different colors are the different ways or tactics that different abusers will use in order to gain that power and control. We've talked about some of these, but specific to teens, I think the peer pressure one is really important to mention. So this idea of spreading rumors, when, if you say to an adult you're going to spread rumors about them, like maybe they care, but like for the most, like I'm like, you want to spread rumors about it, go ahead. I don't really care what you say, right? But for young people, they really, really care about what other people think, what other people say, and that's really, really important to them. The reputation is really important to them. So definitely something to keep in mind. It could be that they're actually making threat. It also could just be the idea of, somebody saying something about them, can keep that power and control. So we do see the social status being used a lot, in terms of, I'm the more popular person. I'm the one that has all the friends. And so, if we break up, you're not going to have anybody, you're not going to have any friends, no one's going to care about you. Those kinds of things we see a lot. I've already mentioned some of the other ones: intimidation, minimizing and denying blame, threatening, coercion, isolation and exclusion. Again, this one's a really big one. We see this, I don't want you to go out with your friends on the weekend because now, one, you're not with me, so I have no control over it. There's probably a bunch of people looking at you that I can't control, right? So if you go out with your friends, I've completely lost control if I'm an abuser and I want to keep control over you, right? So again, we see these kinds of things where that they'll try to isolate, they'll try to pick fights or cause fights with friends just so that people don't go out and don't have that support system. So we've been talking a ton about unhealthy relationships. So, at the center of this wheel is equality. So these are healthy relationships. So I do an activity when I'm in schools and when I'm teaching, where I put healthy and I put unhealthy, and then in the middle it's unsure. And there's lots of different things, these are just a few of them, but there's lots of different things that show us a healthy relationship. And then there are some things that are in the middle that, maybe we have to talk about and figure out for this relationship, what is healthy. So, for some of these, being negotiating or being fair is one. So this is the opposite of this would be one person always making decisions or one person always telling somebody what to do. So when I'm talking to teens about what this looks like in relationships, it might be, do you want to go to this movie or do you want to go to this movie? Do you want to go to this restaurant or do you want to go to that restaurant? Right. So like giving choice in, what we do, what we, how we have conversations and how we make decisions. Obviously we're not using threatening behavior. We're showing respect. There's trust and support. There's honesty and accountability. Responsible parenting is in here even for teens, because I think it's important for them to see parents be responsible in how they interact and engage with each other. So if teens are exposed to both their parents going at it and not being healthy, those are the examples that they're seeing, and those are the examples that they think are normalized. So the more that they can see responsible parenting, and you know what, me and your dad don't get along, but you know what, we're gonna agree to disagree, or we're gonna come to a census, and you can see, and kids can see that, the more they're given really good examples of these things. Media doesn't give us really great examples of healthy relationships. They give us more examples of unhealthy relationships. And I could go into a whole tangent on, even right down to Disney movies and the messages that we're giving little kids about, somebody capturing them and holding them hostage and then them falling in love with them. Like I teach a whole class on Disney movies and relationships and all of the different things that are in that. So I will not go on that tangent. But what I will say about it is that we are getting these messages from early on, from even the Disney movies, about what's healthy and what's unhealthy. And the next time you watch Belle and Gaston and Beauty and the Beast, you can pay attention to just, again, the way that people are talking to each other, the way that people are treating each other. And those are great examples that even from really young ages, you can watch a Disney movie, you can watch something on TV with your child and have conversations about, like, gee, did you see the way that, they talked to Belle? Or did you see the way that, that person was treated? What do you think about that? How would you, react if that happened? So, having these conversations, what we call approachable moments or teachable moments, that are happening, when you're in line and you see two people going at it, or, you're someplace and you see examples of unhealthy relationships, to really call it out. And to also see when you see really good examples of healthy relationships. I think that that's really important too. So, asking somebody, do you want to give me a hug is a really good example of not just assuming or not just, going in, that's a really respectful example of how we can teach people to ask and have boundaries around what they want to and don't want to do. Sorry, I'm gonna go a little slower. I know I'm probably going fast again. So why do they stay? Again, this is a hard question for me because it's very victim blaming, and there are so many reasons why somebody stays. So if we were in person, I would give you all paper and I would have you all write down different reasons why people might stay in a relationship. And I've done this in a room full of 100 people where they all come up with different reasons. And I came up with a few that are on your screen today. But the reality is, there are hundreds of different reasons, and every relationship is unique and different. And, as an outsider, as a parent, as somebody who cares for a loved one or a young one, it's really hard when you see them be in a relationship that's not healthy, because you want to just pluck them right out of it, right? You want to just tell them not to be in it, not to go near that person, ground them, prevent them from, ever seeing that person again. But the reality of it is that there is often these other barriers. A lot of times, the number one barrier that I see is love. Certainly, fear is here as number one. But I can't tell you how many times I hear people say, well, I just want them to go back to the way that they used to be, right? Think about that statement, that number one, that honeymoon phase. I just want it to go back to that. So, they know that at one point this relationship was healthy. And so a lot of times they hold on to that healthy relationship, even though it might not have been healthy for a long time. So again, with a lot of these things, and some of these I put up that they're not just for teens, right? So protecting the kids is something that we see happen a lot of times with adults. And substance, again, a lot of these can go either way. Oops, sorry. Did someone get the dog, please? Thank you. And then this is the fun part about working from home. And then the access to no money, again, the knowledge of recesses, all of these things. We have a department specific for immigration, because we know immigration status can be a barrier or a threat that somebody can use. We have another LGBT department because we know that, again, somebody's orientation, gender identity can also be a barrier to leaving. We have a labor and human trafficking department because, again, if somebody's, been involved in labor trafficking, there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of embarrassment. There's a lot of I don't know where to go. I don't know who to access. I don't know what to do. And for a lot of the folks that we see, they might not have access to money or to their passport. They might be here in the country all by themselves. So they don't have resources. They might not speak the English language. So there's tons of different barriers. The ones that are up here in front of you are just the personal ones. So these are the ones that, a person might feel or experience as a barrier for not wanting to leave the relationship. The next one is societal reasons. So what is everybody else going to say if I leave? So as a general rule, it takes about 7 to 11 attempts for somebody to leave an unhealthy relationship. So it doesn't usually happen the first time they break up, and it doesn't usually happen the second. It's about 7 attempts before they're done for good. So when we think about these different systems, so it could be the legal system, religion, certainly a lot of times will encourage people to stay in relationships, certainly if they have kids or if they're married. And then when we think about, what are the inaccessible social institutions that they might need to go to? So are they set up for English speaking? Are they set up for people who might be deaf and hard of hearing? We actually just hired a director of deaf and hard of hearing so that we can serve this population better, because we know that it's a barrier. In fact, we were kind of talking about this at the police academy, but the deaf and hard of hearing director was like, great, I want to come to the police academy and do role plays. And I'm like, they would have no idea what to do with you if they came to the door. Like they don't even know what to do if somebody is is non-English speaking. Forget if they don't know how to communicate at all. So certainly there's tools that folks can use, but if they're not aware that they exist, it can be a huge barrier. Fear of the police is one we hear all the time, especially with domestic violence for adults. It's a mandatory arrest. And so there's lots of people that don't want to call the police because they don't want their partner to be arrested. Again, if you love that person, or if that person is, the father of your children, you might need that money. You might need that support. You might not want them to go to jail. So we do see fear of police, and then just not wanting to call police because of the outcomes of what that might look like. Happens a lot. I could go on another whole soapbox about how we need restorative approaches and how we need alternatives to criminal justice systems. But we're not there yet. And really, in Rhode Island, that is one of the only ways that a lot of our victims seek justice, is through the criminal justice system, even though what a lot of our victims say is that they don't actually get justice through that system. And then, there's a lot of stereotypes and a lot of societal myths about what domestic violence is, and who's responsible for it, and why do people stay. So there may be some feelings of guilt or shame if somebody doesn't leave an unhealthy relationship. So again, this is just another example of how all of these come into play, but there's a lot of pressure from the victim on all of these different areas to figure out what we're going to do. So if I'm somebody who, I live in a house and I have my kids go to school and they love their friends and they're in a neighborhood, and now I have to figure out, like, what am I going to do if I'm going to leave this relationship? Where am I going to go? Am I going to go to a shelter? Are my kids going to have to go to a different school? What's that going to look like? So there are so many things that fall into and go into why does somebody stay? And the better question to ask is, why are people abusing, right? Why is it that 1 in every 3 people are victims? That also means that on the other end of that are abusers. And so, I'm not going to go off on a soapbox on this either, but I will say that we do not have enough programs for people who abuse, and especially for people who abuse when they're teenagers. So, there is a different system in place completely for teenagers and for adults in terms of the criminal justice system. But the way that it works right now is there's lots of supports for the victim, and there's victim advocates and people, there's lots of funding for that support, but there's not a lot in supporting that person that might have caused harm or might have done something that they either didn't know any better or did know better, but did anyway, to restore that that harm that's been done to the community and re-enter that person into community. There's still a long way that we need to do around that, because what we know is that they do have this sense of entitlement and these like really strong adherence to gender roles, but at the end of the day, a lot of the folks that are abusing are also victims themselves. So they're depending on victims for a lot of their emotional needs because they're not having those emotional needs met in other places. So yes, there's a denial of responsibility, and oftentimes they have seen other people have that same denial of responsibility, and they've seen examples in their own lives of unhealthy relationships. And so that's how they respond, because that's what they know. And so again, it kind of goes back to, we need to show people good examples of healthy relationships and really talk to people about what healthy relationships should feel like and look like and be like, so that they understand that and they understand when they're not in healthy relationships. And I can't tell you how many times I've gone into a session to talk about healthy relationships and I get to the slide, and after class, somebody comes up to me and they say, I do that. Like, I'm worried that after your training session, I'm the abuser in the relationship, right? And they don't want to be, right? They realize that they use power and control in their relationship, and they want a different approach, right? Or they want to learn to do better. And so my hope is that in the future, more programs will be around, not just for the victims, but also for the folks that are causing harm, because what we know is that they're going to leave that relationship, and then they're going to go into other relationships, and they're going to cause additional harm in those relationships. And so if we can stop it when they're teens, before they get into college or before they get into the real world, then that's prevention, right? That's at the core of prevention. So why do they work, right? Why is it that an offender can use these tactics and it can work on a victim? Because the tactics are instilling fear. If I tell you, if you do this thing, I'm going to do this thing, I've now made the victim fearful for that threat. A lot of times they can manipulate what's real. So I used the term gaslighting before. That's a newer term that we've been hearing about the last few years, but it's really this idea of manipulating reality to think that what that person is experiencing isn't actually real, or that their interpretation isn't actually the right interpretation, and that they're misunderstanding what happened. We often hear victims call themselves numb and empty, like they don't even care anymore. And a lot of times, especially with the emotional abuse, they're just so used to it, that they'll say, like, I'm just numb to it. There's always a promise to change and gives hope for the future, because again, they're always trying to get back to that number one, that calm phase. So the victim remembers that, the victim knows that, and they often will say that, well, I'm not bad, I did this for you and I did that for you. And really, the victim loves the abuser. And so that is at the core one of the biggest reasons why people don't leave their abusive relationships, because they think that it can get better. They think that they can change them. They think they can fix them. And they think that they can stop the abuse and get back to the number one, where they had that, what seemed like a honeymoon relationship. And then lots of times they just want to preserve that relationship. So again, this one says family or children, but whether they're preserving their relationship because all their friends are in that relationship. And so, well, if I break up with this person, are people not going to be friends with me anymore? Am I going to lose my social circle? There's lots of different reasons why somebody might protect or preserve that relationship, because for somebody else or for some other reason. And then again, we've already talked a lot about isolation of victims, but if I've been successful in the isolation, then I'm able to get away with a lot more. And that person starts to think, like, where am I going to go? Who's going to believe me? Who can help me? And especially if they push parents away, where the parents have said, and I do a lot of work with parents, especially when when they've identified that their kid's in an unhealthy relationship and they're worried about them. And one of the things that I try to tell parents to avoid doing is just blanketly being like, I don't ever want you seeing or talking to this person again, because when they tell their child what to do, if that child doesn't listen and now they're doing that in secret, if something's going on, they're really going to have a harder time going to the parent and telling them, because they lied to them, or because they weren't being honest with them, or because they told them not to do it and then they did it anyway. So a better approach, and we're going to talk about this in a few minutes, is really to come at it from a place of, I'm really worried about you. This is why I'm concerned about you, as opposed to just blanketly saying, like, no, you can't do this or you can't do that. All right, so I am gonna, for a second, let me come over here. So I want to show you all a resource. So this is the Amaze website. Actually, let me get rid of, so y'all can't see all my clutter on my screen because there's a lot of it. Here we go. So this is, it's called amaze.org. And I use this amaze.org site for lots of different videos and lots of different resources for parents. But tonight we're going to use it for healthy relationships. So this is the site. It's amaze.org. They are having people sign up for it now, just so that they can keep track of how many people are using it. But there's resources for educators, for parents, for literally anybody. These are cartoon-like, so they can be shared with really young kids. I also use a lot of these cartoons in my college classes that I teach. They're really short and simple. They're usually 2 or 3 minutes, and they cover a whole variety of different topics. And so, to give you an example, some of the different topics they talk about: gender identity, personal safety, pregnancy and reproduction. So if you don't want to have the birds and the bees conversation with your kids, let Amaze do it for you, and then just process the conversation afterwards. Lots of conversations about puberty, sexual orientation, STDs. Each one of these you can click on, and each one of these has a whole bunch of videos. So, we're looking at the healthy relationships one for today, but again, I just wanted to show you this resource, because if you're looking to have a conversation with your child and you need something to just kind of go off of, this can be really, really helpful in terms of just finding resources. So I'm going to come down here and just click on the healthy versus unhealthy, since that's what we're talking about today. And so this is the top of the page. So this is the video we're going to watch. It's like 3 minutes long. But also if I scroll down, gives a bunch of information for youth, a whole bunch of frequently asked questions. So when you're having the conversation, you can be prepared. Other related videos. So, this one's on consent. This one's on when will I be ready and when should I have sex? That's for much older youth. I should say that it's not. These are all geared towards any age. And then is it love? Again, they're all very, very short and fairly easy to understand. They're also available in multiple languages. So I know, oh, actually, I wasn't even thinking that you're gonna have to translate in real time with this, but let's see how this works. But they do have them in Spanish. I'll play it in English and I'll have my translators translate it.
Oh, you won't believe the day I've had. It was so terrible. Casey, who's supposed to be my best friend, promised me that we'd go to the mall after school. Later, she texted me that she couldn't go, so I went with Nicole, my almost best friend, instead. But then, at the mall, just next to the food court, you won't believe who I saw. That's right, Casey. And she was with Nathan, her new boyfriend. Ugh, I hate her. I'm so lucky I have you. You're such a good listener. Now that you're in your teens, you may feel like you want to spend less time with your family and more time with your friends. During this time, some of your friendships may deepen while others might fade away. And some of your friendships may even become romantic. Being in a healthy relationship, whether a friendship or a romantic relationship, can be fun, but it can also be complicated. So here are some rules to follow to make sure your friendships are healthy. In a healthy relationship, each person supports and encourages the other. Real friends want to know what you're thinking and feeling, and they'll be interested in what you have to say. It's okay to have disagreements, even in a healthy relationship, but it's important to do so respectfully and talk openly about it with each other. Sometimes in a relationship, you'll need to compromise. But in a healthy relationship, the same person should not be the one who always compromises. It's important for both people to give and take. Finally, it's important to treat your relationships with care. And if a friend or romantic partner makes you feel small, teases you, or physically or sexually pushes you into doing things that you don't really want to do, then this might not be a healthy relationship for you. Remember, a healthy relationship, whether just a friendship or a romantic relationship, should make you feel good about yourself and who you are. After all, you are pretty great. Okay, so enough about me. How was your day? Till next time, don't forget to visit me at amaze.org or go to my YouTube channel to.
All right. So again, that was just an example, 2-minute video. But again, it just really gives context so that if you don't know what to say or how to say something, you can play one of these videos or say, hey, I checked out this site. What do you think about these videos? You can see some of the other ones on healthy relationships. So what makes a relationship healthy? Signs of a toxic relationship. Is my relationship healthy or abusive, and what to do? So, if even if it's a friendship that, they're having problems with the friendship, you can come and play the signs of a toxic relationship. The other thing that it does is it gives you this whole parent site as well. So it gives you conversation starters. It also gives you a couple of TED Talks, and they're all different. Some of the other ones give books. So educators, here's the standard. So if I have teachers on here, you can use these as well. There's lesson plans. And then there's books for all the topics too. So one of the questions I get from parents a lot is, can you share books with me? I read a lot with my kids. I want to share these books. So each one of these topics also has books. So even if you don't want to go on to look at the videos, just go on to check out the book recommendations. All of these books are amazing, particularly the ones that are here on the screen. All come in Spanish, and also are recommendations that I highly recommend. So I think, we've mentioned a lot of these, so I'm not going to read through all of them, but I think what happens sometimes is we see these red flags and we don't know what to do with them, or we, aren't really sure of what's going on. So what I like to do is talk to young people about some of these red flags, so that if and when they see these red flags in their relationship, they know how to approach it. They know how to talk about it. and they know what to do in the relationship around it. So again, these are just more examples of some unhealthy relationships. And you can just ask somebody, like, what do you think are some of the red flags? So when I'm doing this in schools, I have them tell me. So I know here we have the chat shut off and it's more of a webinar style where I'm telling you. But when I'm working with young people, I say, tell me about the things that you see happen in relationships that are not healthy. And these are just some of the things that they've come up with. So the impact, you can see lots of different people respond in different ways. Sometimes they may become depressed or they may withdraw more. Sometimes we might see low self-esteem, poor eating habits, self-blame, confusion. A lot of times they may stop doing things that they were previously doing, things that they enjoyed. They might not be hanging out with friends anymore. They might be constantly seeking assurance or validation from you or from other adults. And what we often see is where victims don't have control in some areas, they try to exert control in other areas. So they might start being really controlling of their friends or of their siblings or of other people in their life, because that's where they do have some control. And again, just as a reminder, I know I keep saying power and control, power and control. When we're working with victims, the more that we can give them the power and control for them to be able to make some of these decisions for themselves, the better that we're going to be. Because there is a lot of shame and embarrassment. And this idea of, this person is kind of, beat the person down, so to speak. And now we're going to try to build that person back up and try to, help them make decisions for themselves, help them feel good about themselves. Start to introduce them to things that they enjoy doing again, have them, contact friends that they might have not been in touch with for a little while. So we try to reverse some of these impacts of abuse when we're working with victims after they've been abused. So you see signs, how can you help? You can listen. I think that's probably the most important thing. I think as adults, we always try to run to solutions. There's a great video that's online right now where the girl has a nail in her head. And the guy's like, and she's like, but I have a headache. And the guy's like, you have a nail in your head. And she's like, no, but it's not about the nail. I just want to tell you what's wrong. Like I can't sleep at night and I'm stressed. And he's like, because of the nail in your head, right? Like, a lot of times the person doesn't want to be told what the problem is. They just want to talk it out. They just want you to listen. And if I had more time, I'd show that video too, because it's kind of funny, because the lady literally has a nail sticking out of her head. But it's not about the nail, right? It's not about the relationship. It's about you listening to what the person is saying and what the person is needing in that moment. And so in that moment, it may just be that they need you to listen and believe them. I always like to thank somebody when they come to me with something and say, that was really hard. Like I appreciate that you're telling me, or I appreciate that you trust me enough to tell me about this. I know it must have been hard for you to share that with me. But like thanking them for the bravery of sharing it, I think is an important thing. And then validating their feelings and also their strength in sharing those feelings with you. And then coming up with safety plan. And as parents, I know this is really hard, because your safety plan might be, I'm just going to tell them that they can't see the person, or that they can't do whatever it is that we want, that they want to do. But the more that we can help them come to what that looks like, the better it's going to be. So if instead of me saying to them, you can't do this, I say, I'm really worried about you. What's going to happen the next time this happens? Or what can you do if this thing happens? Sorry, my family just put a gate up. Can you all please help? So now my dog is trying to come in the room that I'm in because he can hear me talk. So in addition to validating their feelings and experience, their strengths, and creating a safety plan, the other thing that you can do is ask them how you can support them and who you can share the information with. So sometimes as adults, we get information from young people and then we share that information for them. We tell their teachers, we tell their counselors, we tell their, the people. It might be, we're telling their aunts or we're telling their grandparents. So really checking in with that person about what they just shared with you and how you want that information to be shared with and who you want that information to be shared with will really impact whether or not that young person feels comfortable and safe coming to you with other things. So if they can come to you with this and say, this thing happened, or I'm really worried. And you can thank them and you can show them that you're there for them and you can meet them where they are and you can support them instead of telling them what to do, the more likely they are to come to you if things get more severe or something different happens. So again, I know it's really hard to kind of step back as an adult and not tell young people what to do. But the more that you can educate them, support them, talk to them about what's healthy and not healthy, give them resources, engage with them, and really connect with them, the more likely it is that you're going to actually help them than if you just say, well, I don't like that person and I don't ever want you seeing that person and they're not ever allowed here again. Those things are actually not helpful for victims, especially if they're trying to figure out what to do in that relationship. And I know we're at the end and it's hard to come to the end. I could probably talk and keep talking for another hour with all of the different resources and things. What I will say is all of your students, for all the parents that are on here, all of your students, in addition to having you as a resource, also have the school, and within the schools, they all have access to our school-based advocate. So you as a parent could call our school-based advocate, or students can reach out to their guidance counselors and they can contact the advocate. But there are advocates that, that can go to any of the Providence schools and just meet and talk to students if they're in one of these relationships or if they need additional support. If you as a parent have questions or concerns about a young person, or you want to, bring a young person in to have that conversation, we only do that if the young person wants to be a part of that conversation and is seeking that for themselves. So, we don't encourage parents to just drag their kids to Sojourner House and then be like, okay, you're going to have a conversation. But if it is that, you're looking to talk to an advocate and you need some support around leaving a healthy relationship or safety planning, or figuring out options, feel free to reach out to us. I mentioned a lot of different resources that we have. So we have housing, and we have emergency shelters for adults who are experiencing human trafficking, sexual assault, or domestic violence. We do have a transitional age youth shelter for folks that are transitional age, that's 18 to 24, who are experiencing any form of homelessness. It doesn't necessarily need to be domestic violence in that case. And again, we have advocates that can just talk to people, because what we find is sometimes it's helpful to talk to somebody that's not directly connected to the relationship, and to talk to somebody that really doesn't know their partner, and they don't have to worry about the shame or embarrassment of it, because at the end of the day, that person that they're talking to is also a stranger. So just some options in terms of if you are talking to somebody or you hear somebody say something and you feel like you need some additional support with that conversation.
Hi, Lisa. We have a question.
Yep.
And the question is, when are you giving this class again? Or where can I find it again? I need my nieces to take the class.
Yeah, so we do. So like I mentioned, I don't know what school they're in Providence, but we do a lot of these education sessions in school. So hopefully all of your students are getting that education. We do have a peer education program, so we do run programs throughout the year, particularly in February. So February is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, so we do some open to the public events that we can share. So Jill, I think you're actually probably the person that we would share that with, that could share it with the district, but we can share those workshops so that you can share them with the young people that are in your life.
And then we have a second question that says, and where are there the emergency shelters for adults?
Good question. So they're undisclosed locations, obviously, right? We don't want to disclose the locations. What I can say is that they're all over the state. So we have 250 shelter beds all over. So we have some in Providence, some in Woonsocket, some in Newport, some in Pawtucket. Like, they are all over the place. We have them in Foster, Gloucester, if folks want to go out into the woods too. But there are there's different varieties. So we have our what we call a safe house, which is the undisclosed shelter. That's emergency shelter. We really try not to keep people in the emergency shelter too long. We really try to just have that be respite for emergencies. and then we try to get them into transitional housing. We also have a permanent supportive housing program, and then yeah, so transitional housing and then permanent supportive housing. So, the idea is to try to move people to permanent residency, and keep the shelter beds open for emergencies. So, and we know that there's a huge housing crisis in Rhode Island, and so, that there's always a need for those shelter beds.
Awesome. Are there any more questions from the participants? You can type it up in the Q&A.
The only other thing that I think probably is an important thing for parents, and I thought there was a slide on it, but I think might have gotten taken out at one point, is talking to your kids about the digital safety around sexting. So I know sometimes it comes up even in healthy relationships where people are exchanging pictures. I do work a lot with young people where they're sharing that people are requesting these pictures of them. And so I think really just having a conversation with young people about what to do if somebody does approach them, especially online, about taking pictures or sharing pictures of themselves. And then also just to know that if you are sharing those pictures, it is considered distribution of pornography. And if somebody gets those pictures, it's considered possession of child pornography. So we just want to really make sure that young people are aware that that is a really significant thing, and it's not something to take lightly, because we are seeing this happening more and more with young people, and they're being approached on things like Roblox and Fortnite and some of these like apps that really young kids are using. And so whenever I have parents in the room, I'm always like, this thing is happening. So please talk to your kids about, what to do if that thing happens.
Awesome. Thank you. Are there any more questions that we can ask Lisa? All right. If not, Lisa, do you have your contact information that people can reach out to, or we can actually send it to the group that's here? So don't
Yep.
worry about that. We'll send it out
Yep.
if folks want it. Just as a reminder, I'm going to share my screen again.
I'm going to try to put it in the chat, and then I will log off for the next part.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your expertise. I learned a lot today, and we hope to have you back soon, to give our parents and our community members more information.
It's not letting me share it in the chat at the bottom, but I will. I think I already shared it with you, and you're more than welcome to share it with everybody else.
Okay, awesome. I'll do
And my
that.
contact information is on there. So have a
Okay.
great night, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Bye.
Just as a reminder, we really would like you guys to fill out the parent form. Just feedback. It's so important for us to get your feedback so that we can refine our presentations, but also invite other guests to come and speak with you all. So for you to be able to get access or be eligible for the giveaways, you really need to fill out the feedback form. And today we're going to do 3, which is the first one is the Paw Patrol figures. The second one is Train Go Train, and the last one is a book and stuffed llama. So again, please fill out the feedback form, and each prize is going to come with a coupon to Wendy's as well as Burger King. Thank you. I'm going to look at the form now to see if we have participants who filled out the response. Give me 1 second. Continue to fill them out. Again, the form is on the chat right now. I think we have 2 people who completed it. All right, it's moving up to 3. Can't see it. Yua, can you put it in the chat again?
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm. Yeah, it's in the chat
Alright.
now.
Yes, I see that we're increasing in participation. Thank you. This will just take, I'm gonna just hold a few more minutes before I start the raffle. Again, everybody, thank you for your participation and your questions. We really would like your feedback.